Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Guess That Disorder in the DSM. I'm your host, Karl. Today we'll be talking about Bipolar 1. We had double duty this week. Janelle's talking about Bipolar 2, and I'm talking about Bipolar 1 as such. In understanding Bipolar 1, the first thing you have to understand is, and I know Janelle's touched on that as well, is understanding the various, what they call building blocks of that. Bipolar obviously means two polar opposites. What they're talking about in those scenarios is a depressive episode versus a manic episode. Cheating with notes in the background. Basically, major depressive episode is the episode. So it's not major depression that lasts a really long time or is extended as such, but is an episode. It can come on sudden. Certainly, like depression, you are looking for certain symptoms that include rapid change in weight, major disruption of sleep, changes in psychomotor skills and activities, lower self-esteem, inappropriate type of guilt. You're also looking for they have a hard time focusing, hard time making decisions, making commitments, more than what they would normally do. Is suicide and death thoughts, and that's where you really have to watch somebody that's in a depressive episode. Watching them is very common during that time, and it actually is for people that are having a depressive episode. According to what we read, is that they're actually 4 times more likely to have suicide attempts than even people that have recurrent major depression. And so that's something you really have to look out for. So if they have if they have at least 5 of those various symptoms that you're seeing, then it's something you can look at major depressive episode. The main thing to look at when you're talking about major depressive episode and manic episodes as well is you're looking for that major mood change in them. And the change is such that it impacts their ability to function at some level. It will impact how they function at work, how they function socially, and how they function basically in living skills. And so if those changes have been made, then certainly that's what you're looking for as such, with the building blocks of both manic and in depression. Manic episode, exact opposite. During manic episodes, and for those people that have worked with bipolar and seen somebody with a manic episode, you'll know it really is just like best case scenario was our homework last week. Somebody with a manic episode, not uncommon, they're going to have sleep issues, calling people at 3 o'clock in the morning with great ideas. What you're looking for is they'll have very grandiose ideas, very high self-esteem, thinking themselves as the best, reduction in sleep patterns. They're very talkative, very easily distractible. Psychomotor skills are really highly increased, very poor judgment, flight of ideas, those type of things like we read in the scenario last week, is really the manic episode. The difference that you see between the manic episodes versus in Bipolar 2, which is more the hypomanic versus the manic, or the difference between Bipolar 1 and Bipolar 2, is really kind of Bipolar 2 is kind of like this type of county fair roller coaster, where Bipolar 1 would be more like the Six Flag roller coaster. It's very extreme. And if you work with somebody that's had those manic episodes, it's pretty bad. They're just as dangerous during manic episodes, because during manic episodes they feel kind of bulletproof. They can go out and do whatever they want. You can have a lot of consequences, medical consequences, physical consequences, financial consequences, have been accredited to people during mania episodes, manic episodes. And so it's something you really kind of have to look out for and help them with during those episodes. Also, unlike Bipolar 2, people with Bipolar 1 could possibly have psychotic features. Not all of them do, but could have them, and may require hospitalization. If you have Bipolar 2 and you get hospitalized because it got too much out, you're going to get a Bipolar 1 diagnosis. And so that's what they're kind of looking for in those type of things as well. And as far as the psychotic features, that would include hallucinations. So, in those cases, if they have at least 3 of those type of symptoms I talked about during a manic episode within a 1-week period. Depressive episode only requires 2 weeks, unless they're hospitalized, of course. The manic episode only requires a 1 week of those type of symptoms. Then they can be considered to have a manic episode as such. There's also a mixed episode, and the mixed episode is literally what it sounds like. It's just the manic episodes and the depressive episodes happening concurrently, and they're just kind of going back and forth with those within that one. It requires at least a 1-week period where they're literally just kind of going back and forth. It's not as common, but it's there, and certainly people with bipolar can have it as well. Always remember in all those case scenarios, obviously, to rule out any type of medical condition or substance abuse. In fact, people with bipolar, and I noted that in my PowerPoint, they found that there's 30% of the people that have been diagnosed with bipolar also have alcohol abuse problems as well, and so it's not uncommon to find that. They also found that a lot of people with a bipolar disorder have a comorbid disorder as well. Usually anxiety tends to flow along with that as well. So look out for that. Lots of times, just as a note, because if you work with some of the older physicians or some of the older folks that have had this for a while, they'll refer to this as manic depression. And so sometimes you'll hear some of the people that have had it for a while say, well, I'm manic depressant. That's an old term that's been used for that. It's bipolar. It's the same thing as much. So most of the studies show, as far as sexes, women and men tend to have it together. There's not a whole lot of studies that are really solid as far as ethnicity when it comes to bipolar, but certainly I'm sure there's more coming out there as such. Just making sure I hit all my highlights as well. One thing that's really, really interesting with bipolar is that there's a very heightened sense of creativity, and on my PowerPoint presentation I pointed out a couple of very famous people. Because of the creativity, it's usually people that are in the arts, music, movies, art, those type of things. So, and I had a list, and it's actually a very extensive list, but even people that have been in sports and in politics have been diagnosed with bipolar, and so kind of an extensive list of people that I was a little bit surprised about as well when working with people like that. Causes, they're thinking hereditary, possible changes in dopamine, serotonin could be some of the causes. They're also seeing the brain, the actual structure of the brain for people with bipolar is different than the general population as well, so they're kind of exploring that a little bit more. Treatment options, meds. There's lots of different types of meds for that, for people with bipolar, and that's kind of been the traditional, but they are really trying to push a lot more of doing the psychotherapy with the meds, both group and individual, and that tends to work really, really, really well, and most of the results are showing that that's pretty effective. And when in treatment, you're really kind of talking a lot about coping skills when they have those various episodes, and how to cope and have a plan in place for them. So that's the important parts of that. Changes in the DSM-5, just so you know, that are coming around, is that there's the emphasis that happens with both the manic and the depressive episode. It's important that you look at their mood, that there is a major mood change, that it's sudden, and that it impacts some level of functioning. But when the DSM-5, they're mentioning not just a mood change, but there's also an emphasis on a impact when it comes to activity and energy, or change that has happened in both activity and energy that has that impact. Again, they're looking at what impact that has, but they're looking at just beyond the mood. Mood is still one, but you're also going to be looking at activity and energy, a change in that. Also, depression and bipolar, if you don't know, in the DSM-5 are actually separated now. They're no longer both under the mood disorders. They actually have their own little separate place in the DSM-5 to follow up. Bipolar mixed episodes is no longer in there. Basically now when you put it down, it's going to say bipolar with mixed features. Then you'll explain a little bit more about what features those were as such. So that's going to be out of the DSM-4. DSM-5, it's out of the... it's going to be gone. Also, bipolar NOS, not otherwise specified, is going to be... it got cut as well. So Um, it's going to now say the other specified bipolar and related disorder, and of course you're going to have to describe that a little bit more. I see it's been 2 minutes. I don't want to go on and on and on and on about the various things. That's why I had the timer go off as well. That's just some of the highlights. Obviously, look at the slides for a little bit more and look into it. But that's kind of what you're looking for with somebody that has bipolar 1 versus bipolar 2. Another thing to note that I don't know why I didn't know that is that somebody with bipolar 1 can have just a manic episode, and they can have a single manic episode, just like what our scenario in our homework was last week, and at that point they are bipolar 1 with just manic episode, with one manic episode. Usually in those cases, however, the depressive episode sets in most of the population that has a manic episode. The depressive episode will set in eventually, and in which case their diagnosis will be changed just to bipolar 1 disorder as such. So I think that's it. I'm in 11 minutes. I don't want to keep boring everybody on and on and on and on. So thanks a lot. Later.